The Flow Editor is Fusion's primary workspace. The Flow provides a schematic type overview of the structure of your composite. Each tool in the composition is represented by a tile in the workspace, with connections leading to and from the tile to indicate how the tool connects to other tools in the composite. This workspace is known as the flow because images move through the connections like water through pipes. By watching the flow of the images through these pipes, we gain an understanding of our composite. Creating a new composition or opening an existing composition will generally start with the Flow Editor as the visible portion of the interface. If for any reason the timeline or spline editors are displayed instead, you can click on the Flow tab in the work area, or you can press the F5 key on your keyboard to display the flow. We can pan the flow or resize it using techniques which are similar to all of the work areas in Fusion. The flow, the timeline, the spline editor, and the display views use much the same methods. Place your mouse pointer over top of the flow editor, then hold the middle mouse button down. Your cursor's icon will change to an image of a hand. This represents that you can pan the view by clicking and dragging to the left or to the right using the middle mouse button. If you don't have a middle mouse button, you can hold the Control and the Shift keys down, and then click with the left mouse button to achieve the same result. In the top right corner of the Flow Editor, you will see an overview of your flow surrounded by a yellow rectangle representing the currently visible area. Click and drag in this overview to pan and position the visible area of your flow. This is another method of panning. Using the minus and plus keys on your numeric keypad will also allow you to zoom in and out of the flow's composition. If you're zoomed out on the composition, you can select a group of tools, then right-click and select Scale, Scale to Fit from the context menu. The Flow Editor will be resized so that the tiles for the selected tools fit within the flow. There are actually two context menus available from the Flow Editor. Right-clicking directly on a tool will display a context menu with options and settings for that tool. Right-clicking on an empty area of the flow will display a context menu showing just options and settings for the flow in general. Examine the tile picture options found in the middle of this context menu. The first option is Force Active Tile Picture, then Force Source Tile Pictures, Force Mask Tile Pictures, and Force All Tile Pictures. By default, Fusion displays a small rectangle tile to represent each tool in the Flow Editor. These options allow you to say to Fusion to use a small thumbnail of the image it's producing or an icon to represent each of the tools. Select Force All Tile Pictures for an example. In this case, Fusion has used an icon to represent the functionality of each tool. This is because the tools have not yet been viewed in the display view. As a result, Fusion does not know what image to display for each of the tools. Until the tool has been viewed, the tool does not render. To demonstrate, view the Merge tool in one of the display views. Note how each of the thumbnails fills with an image representing the image that it's producing. If you prefer to see the icons instead of the thumbnail images, right-click again in an empty area of the flow and deselect the Show Thumbnails option. Certain tools will not show an image under any circumstances. For example, these three merges are concatenated. As a result, they're not producing an image until you get to the final tool that represents the flattened transformation. Additionally, particle tools and 3D tools which do not generate images until you reach the renderer will also not display thumbnail images. There are several techniques that you can use to display the image from one of the tools in the display views. The most commonly used technique is to grab the tool's tile from the flow and drag it into the display view and then drop the tool. This will display the drag tool in the view. When the tool is displayed, the tile icon will show a small, tiny light on the underside of the tool tile to indicate that the tool is viewed. You can also right-click on a tool and select View On and left or right from the context menu that appears. Take note of the keyboard shortcuts printed to the side of each display view. The 1 key or the 2 key can be used to display in the left or the right views respectively. Simply select a tool and then press 1 to update the view, or 2 to update the right-hand view. Clicking directly on the indicators at the bottom of the tool tile can allow you to toggle the display of that tool in each of the views. You can change a tool's name from the Flow Editor by right-clicking on the tool and then selecting Rename from the context menu. You can also use the F2 keyboard shortcut. Type in the new name for the tool, then click on OK to change the name of the tool. Provided that a tool has been rendered, whenever you place your mouse pointer over the top of the tool's tile, a small pop-up will appear describing the name of the tool's type, its frame size, pixel aspect, and color depth. There are many different ways to add tools to the flow. Click on an empty area of the flow to ensure that none of the tools are selected. Then go to the menu at the top of the interface and select Tools. Each of the tool categories known to Fusion is listed in this menu, including third-party plugins. Locate the Color menu and then select Brightness Contrast from the menu that appears. Fusion will drop a Brightness Contrast tool into the flow in the first available space, which is usually somewhere to the bottom left or bottom right of the flow. Hit Edit Undo to undo adding the Brightness Contrast tool and pan back to the beginning of our flow. To place a tool exactly where we want it in the flow, we right-click and then select from the Add Tool menu that appears. To add the same Brightness Contrast tool, we now select Color, Brightness Contrast, and it's located where we right-clicked when we first called up the context menu. Use Ctrl-Z to undo adding the Brightness Contrast tool using the context menu. You can also locate the Brightness Contrast tool in the toolbars across the top of the screen. In this case, Brightness Contrast is labeled with BC. Click and drag to drop the Brightness Contrast tool into the flow precisely where we need it. If a tool is selected, then the behavior becomes slightly different. For example, select the Sun BG tool. Click once on the Brightness Contrast tool in the toolbar above, and Fusion will add the Brightness Contrast tool automatically connected to the Sun tool. Use Ctrl-Z to undo adding the Brightness Contrast tool. The same applies to adding a tool using the Tools menu. If another tool is selected, when we select Brightness Contrast from this menu, the Brightness Contrast tool will be added connected to the Sun tool. In addition to using the Tool menu, the toolbars, or the context menu in the flow to add tools, you can also open the bins using Ctrl-B or the Bins button at the top toolbar, and then locate the Tools folders that appear here. If you do not see Tools folders, then select your top level of your bins, right-click, and select Create Tool Folders. Each of the categories in the tool folders shows the icons that represent the tools that are available. Select the Color category, and then locate the Brightness Contrast tool in the list of icons that you see here. Then click and drag to drop the tool into the flow, or again, with one of the other tools selected, double-click and the tool will automatically be added, connected to the tool that was previously selected. Close the bins. To insert a tool between the Sun BG tool and the Merge Sun tool, we could click on the tool we wanted from the toolbar, drag, and position our mouse pointer until the pipe connecting those tools was highlighted. When we release the mouse pointer, a new tool will be added in between the existing tools. We could also place our mouse pointer over top of the pipe until it's highlighted, then right-click, select Add Tool, Color, Brightness Contrast, and Fusion will automatically connect the tool to the pipe. To remove a tool without breaking the connections and make up the flow, hold down the Shift key, then click and drag on the tool. This will break the connections that are currently attached to the tool so that it can be moved out of place. This shift-drag technique can also be used to insert a tool back in the connection between two pipes. For example, hold the Shift key down and drag the tool we just removed back into the pipe in order to reconnect it. To replace one tool with another, click and drag on the replacement tool, in this case a color corrector tool, and drag it and position it directly over top of the tool you wish to replace. When you release the mouse pointer, a dialog will appear asking if you are certain you would like to replace the one tool with the other. Click on OK, and the tools will be replaced. We will use a different composition to demonstrate connections between tools. The output of an unconnected tool is always represented as a small red box. The color red is used to indicate that this output is not connected. To connect two tools together, you must click and drag a pipe from the output and connect it to another tool in the composition. You can either place the pipe directly over top of the input on the tool, or by clicking and dragging, you can just place the pipe over top of any portion of the tool and release. This will automatically connect the pipe to the first or the primary input on the tool. Note that one of the more interesting capabilities of the flow editor is the ability to branch or to use different output streams, taking the source from the background tool and applying it to this color corrector tool, this paint tool, and this grid warp, each for separate processing. An example of this might be to use this paint tools, do a little bit of painting, and then connect it to the effect mask image on this brightness contrast. As a result, we've branched out the background into two different processing streams and then recombined them later. It is this ability to branch the output of a tool into separate processing streams that lends the flow its power and flexibility over the normal timeline-based approach to compositing. The pipe connecting the tools is separated into two halves, the first half and the second half. To disconnect the pipe, you can click anywhere on the second half and drag, and then release. You can also click directly on the tool's output and then click and drag to release. To replace the input on one tool with the output of another, you can simply drag the output, position it over the already connected input, and release. This will replace that connection. Note that the position of the inputs on the tool's tile will move in order to provide the most efficient connection between the two tools. Note that fusion flows are actually made up of several different types of tools, not all of which can be connected to each other. Normal image tools can connect from one to the other without any problem at all. However, Fusion also supports a particle system as well as a 3D environment, as represented by the P-emitter and image plane tool you see below. You can connect particle system tools to other particle systems, and you can connect 3D tools to other 3D tools. However, you cannot connect a particle emitter tool directly to, say, a brightness contrast tool. If you attempt to do this, the connection will simply fail. The only exception to this rule are the P-render and the Render 3D tools, both of which produce a regular 2D image output. As a result, you can connect the output of a P-render to a brightness contrast, or the output of a 3D tool to a brightness contrast. Something to note is that as I move each of my tools, they've been snapping to a grid-like position in the composition, or in the flow editor. This is because I've enabled an option for my flow called Arrange Tools to Grid. If I disable this option, then each of the tool tiles is freely positional, which is the default for most new installations of Fusion. Another difference between my flow editor and the one you probably have when you first installed Fusion is that my flow editor is not showing the grid that displays in the back of the flow. This is because I have turned the grid off in order to improve the compression for these videos. This concludes the first half of the Flows interface video. The second half covers copying and pasting tools, saving tool settings, creating tool instances, and working with groups in the flow.